I want to correct something only because I got into an argument with someone about this, right? Because of the length of the investigation. I maintain that this was not one of those lengthy federal investigations that lasted for years. No, right? From my understanding, it started and is obviously revolving around Cassie first. Once the details of her lawsuit became public, and in addition to the gentleman, I think the gay fella, or excuse me, the whatever fella who kind of talked about some of the things. That was the impetus that I think the Southern District, New York, used to form this case. So it's not like they've been sitting on Puffy for 10 years. Now, whether or not they can prove that crimes were committed within the past 10 years, absolutely. But it's not like the feds have been sitting on Puffy for 10 years. That was an argument I got with someone and was willing to bet 15,000 on. Sorry for the callback. Maybe not the most appropriate one. You weren't here, Tia, so everybody knows what I'm talking about. But that was the callback. It was a $15,000 bet that I'm still waiting on my money on. But the point is,
I
the feds have
disagree.
not been digging.
They knew that he
Gotcha,
blew up Kid
so.
Coodie's car.
Okay.
I don't think that Cassie is the nucleus of this either. I think Kim Porter was. Hold on a
Everybody
second.
knew that.
If
That was
Kim
rumors
Porter's
that was
book had
around.
came out
It
to
wasn't
light,
like
it was said to have been exposing of everybody and everything, including Cassie and Puffy and all the other people involved. The reason why she happened to end up dead before the release of the book, coincidence? Who knows, right? But Al B. Sure has come out and said that he was intimidating other people, hanging off of balconies. If we're talking about a pattern of behavior, it's been established. People just didn't have enough money to fight the case. The man was paying off the bellhop at the
I'm not
hotel for the
knocking that.
video. Like, this level of intimidation is so high.
I'm not knocking that. No, listen, just to be clear, I'm not knocking that. I'm just pushing back on the idea that the federal prosecutors have been trying to put a case against Puffy together prior to this, and that is not the case, right? And you can see that evidenced by these star witnesses, the two people who are in part of the predicate to the felony that you're talking about, right? Cassie and the unidentified woman, by definition of this RICO, are the predicates of this, right? And my point is, they became that once they were aware of what he did, then the video came out. So I'm just making it clear because I literally got into an argument with someone in regards to this point because you're like, no, they've been investigating for 17. If you don't touch them, but go ahead, somebody else before I say something.
Yeah, I was ready to say, let's go ahead and move past that.
I'm
And
triggered us in there. You saw that?
let me ask this question. So so my question is, the general consensus in the public though seems to put a lot of blame on Cassie. And so I'm interested in hearing if she deserves the level of blame that she's getting for staying in the relationship, or if she's complicit overall in the RICO case herself, and should she be a part of the case versus being classified as a victim.
So I want to say this to clarify something, because so when I spoke earlier, I was talking about the fact that if you look at law, sometimes it's not what we think a thing is. It's like how you read the statute. It's funny we referenced Tory Lanez. There was a lot of people thought that he was being charged with one thing, but when you go back and look at the actual charges, it was something completely different. Like I literally heard people who had talked about this case like, oh, Steph, I thought it was something else. Why? Because most of us don't understand legalese. So I'm just positing the fact that I do think the elements are there from what I've read, right? And I do think that it's possible that they have what they need to the case. Now, whether or not, and I also believe that there's just so much freak off going on that people, whatever. There was a piece of testimony, for example, right, where I think it was showing her early on in the relationship being open to certain things, right? And that's important because when you start to try to discern who's telling the truth, I guess to my point earlier, like at what point in time was it voluntary and did it change? Right? Because you then have to acknowledge at some point it was voluntary. If you try to make it seem like it was always coercive, then when a person gets caught either in a text message because it takes away from the narrative, then you have plausible, like people be like, well, wait a minute, you were now. So some of to your point, Tia, like people may not understand the nuances of Stockholm syndrome, right? But to be fair, there are people who run to that though, even though they were willing participants. I remember Carisha maybe about a year ago, she was caught saying some shit when she was dealing with Diddy, right? Some girl had said something to her or whatever, and she took on this persona, right? Like, oh, I'm going to have my nigga have you eat my pussy type of shit, right? So if we saw that from her early on in the relationship, would we believe that that person who behaved that way all of a sudden is going to come back and claim victim? We wouldn't necessarily, right? Because we saw behavior that said, oh, you were with the fuck shit too early on in the situation, right? And so most people don't have the bandwidth to be like, oh, okay, because they feel like once you're in the muck, it is what it is. You get what I'm saying? So that's why a lot of times in these cases, people will point, because unfortunately, when you do make the accusation, your accuser and other people have the right to kind of look at you and say, hey, is there some validity here? And do you have some corroborating evidence? Right? So I get that it feels uncomfortable for women to be like, oh, automatically run to the, oh, we got to protect women. But no, we got to protect the process a little bit, right? Because if somebody else is being accused, whether it's women, whether it's men, I'm saying that you don't have to, in trying to make sure the process is fair, it's just as a process doesn't mean you're trying to demean somebody in that process, right? To a certain extent, because I think people generally are going to be curious about what a person's role was, because all we had was the narrative, and now we're getting text messages. Now we're seeing other behavior. And I'll land by saying this. It reminded me of a Law and Order episode where a girl had got initially kidnapped, right? I mean, this is TV, but I thought it was interesting. She initially got kidnapped by a rogue dude, and then eventually they fell in love a little bit. And so she went from being a captive to being a participant in the situation. And ultimately she got convicted because it was discovered that, yes, while the relationship started off in one way, that she was completely within her faculties and in fact joined in on the situation. So I think it's also fair to say that there are some people who can wonder, at what point did she jump in? Did she jump back out? Right? Like, so there's a lot here to ask regular everyday people to weed through. So a lot of the times when I hear people responding to it, most of the time I feel like they were responding from our own vantage point, and in part, maybe our own experiences, maybe some of our own triggers, right? And we try to project a little bit, but I'm just simply saying, like, there's a lot here, and to just assume automatically that she has no culpability, to me, doesn't at least give the exercise of trying to see the truth for what it is any justice, because we're automatically excluding her, and that creates a blind spot. And I just am not a blind spot topic.
This thing is so layered, we could talk forever, but this is just what I'll say. Carisha was 36, 34, 35. Cassie was 18, looking for a record deal. The power dynamic going into the relationship is significantly different. Asking someone to be freaky with you because you're of age and you've had experience and blah, 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 then yes, this person has $1 million herself. You can't cajole her to do some of the things that you would cajole someone else, because she comes in with power. She really doesn't need anything from you but you. But when you have someone who's 17 or 18 and they're coming in looking for a record deal, and you buy them a house, you buy them a car, you put their parents up in a house, and then every time that person tells you no, you lock them out of their house. You take their shoes, you take their credit cards, right? You create the dynamic of power where a person can't any longer say no. And that is the difference between Cassie and Carisha. She was 18 looking for an opportunity, and he used and leveraged everything against her. If you hear some of the commentary, she talks about, he would tell me if I didn't do something that my album would never come out. And he did that for like 7 years. Other producers would talk about them coming in and making music and him saying that it would never be released because it was something that he was holding over her head to keep her in line. The power is what changes that between Carisha and Cassie. So I agree with what you're saying. We can't look at every victim and say they're a victim without the evidence. I think everybody deserves due process. But we also have to talk about, like DDG and Hallie talked about, having a pattern of behavior. Clearly he has a pattern of aggression and overreaching behavior. We saw that when he made them fools walk from one borough to the next for cheesecake. We knew something was wrong with him when he cursed Lorianne out about a messed up dance move on Making of the Band. We saw firsthand him be out of control and trigger happy with power. We knew when he had a little meme where he was like, I get whatever I want. Like, something is wrong. It's egotistical, it's maniacal, and it leads into issues when a person has money that they can use behind it.
It does the argument a disservice to bring up a clip from a TV show that clearly had great ratings. He didn't do anything illegal, that it was clearly performative. In a case that we're talking about that's criminal, all I'm saying is you kind of dilute it. If you're talking about he's on trial for being an asshole or being a mogul or whatever, the same thing you're talking about, we loved when it happened back then. Dylon, all that was part of television. That show was a fucking hit. So it's like when we add that to the conversation, I'm just saying we kind of watered it down a little bit. And just to push back on the point about Carisha, I wasn't trying to compare two women of different ages. I'm talking about the type of behavior where sometimes, right, people be into the fuck shit, right? And so, yes, you could say she was 21, but what happens when these groupies be coming out here trying to siphon off of niggas? Do we absolve people of all responsibility? I'm just saying in general, move it off of them. I'm talking about the behavior of, yes, the person's empowered, but how many people are constantly on their dicks trying to get something from them? How many? Do none of those people accept no responsibility for their part that they played? You get it at all?